Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. Our special guest tonight is a man. Well, he could be a woman. All right, is a woman. Could be a man. Well, I want to get it right. Our special guest is this person who is a born-again, cross-dressing, recovering alcoholic abused child. He'll be on just a second. Who is an environmentally aware, sex-addicted single parent. Who, it says, recently had a near-death experience with a UFO contactee. And who has reached that glass ceiling that so confronts the physically challenged with limited communicational skills planning their sex change operation. Thank God he couldn't make it. But what an intro, huh? Continuing on with how a neuro-revolutionist might be able to look after his own private interest while in no way conflicting with life's, looking after its and life, of course, specifically looking after its interest, which is the only way it can in the 3D world, or the only way that we're going to talk about, through other people, others, as reflected in that wonderful equation. They just don't make papers wide as they used to. Is I plus not I equals everything. All right. If you recall, when we left off, I pulled out an example and we were talking about an imaginary new public concern, proposed legislation, the debate over watch control. Whether in some way, and of course this equation we're referring to now strictly in a secondary sense. The world of intellect, the singular world of intellectual man, where what you are, you being the I, composes everything possible when it is added to everything that's not you. There's no way out, I'm sorry. It's a dastardly equation, but that's what mathematics are about. We were using that kind of silly example I made up of watch control, if you recall, and I was, to get us going again, was saying that if a real revolutionist heard that there was proposed legislation, just today somebody says in the U.S. Congress is going to propose that there be some kind of control over the private ownership of timepieces, and we just assume that this particular neuro-revolutionist decides, I'm going to get a watch. Might need one someday. Who knows why, but he decides I'm going to get it now just in case. He may not know. He may not even have enough interest to give it a second thought about what a dumb idea. I wonder if it'll pass. I wonder if it won't pass. Let's assume he's got better things to do. God knows we hope he does. And so he might decide, on the way to work, I'll stop down at the 7-Eleven store and I'll get myself one of those nice rubber neon $1.98 specials you get with a fill-up, a watch. I'll have a watch. The thing is, he has no interest in the debate. Whatever life is up to, whether legislation disappears, whether it fails, whether it passes and then they repeal it, it's of no interest, in a sense. Life is looking after its interest, whatever they may be. We're not even going into it, because that's not the dumbest example I could make up. I thought it was the other night, but Jesus, since then I thought a lot dumber stuff than that. But since then, I picked up a newspaper. So I guess I failed again in making up my dumb example. At any rate, life knows what it's doing. I bet life will love to hear us say that. It'll feel so proud. Life is up to one thing, so it's looking after its interests, whichever way it happens to go. And it, of course, is going to zigzag and stagger some way or the other. But let's say that the revolutionist, to get us going, remember, is all we're doing. With that example, for whatever reason, he just decides, I want a watch. I'm going to get a watch now. The debate and whatever happens in the future, that's life's interest. my interest, I'm going to get a watch. Before we get into more real operational or useful specifics, I was hoping, there are 2 or 3 other examples of varying natures getting into that which is actually more personal. But there are several going on, and I'm not using them just to bring up other examples or just to reinforce the watch control example, because these are of a different nature, but there are several going on that have a different aspect to them that would appear to be the same kind of thing going on out in life, and rather than me have to make up the dumb examples, there is a couple that have their own beauty that are going on contemporaneously, this being July of 1991. One of them is the current idea that I assume all of you have heard of political correctness, the great PC debate going on now. Now what it amounts to, I'm not going to give you a lesson, surely all of you have read, is just an expansion of things been going on before, but it's a new term, but it is now, of more and more, and especially in the world of academia, is where it seemed to have sprouted from, but of more and more taking very specific aim at the way people express themselves. Certain words are now being forbid or suggested to be forbidden on campus, the very bastions of free speech and etc., on the basis that they are offensive. Now this would seem, surely all of you can see right quick, this would seem to be an absolute sitting duck for sophisticated pros and cons, and almost helpless. Now, not from any of you, I hope those of you who might be turning this on, was if you were waiting for some attack or support of it, boy, are you on the wrong channel. Well, at least I didn't say you were on the wrong planet. No. I'll take responsibility from that side of the equation. You're in the right place, you just on the wrong station. But just understand, I wasn't going into, because the example, again, although I'll bring them up, but to continue to remind you, the example itself is of no more consequence than my made-up one of a imaginary idea of proposed control of the private ownership of watches. But this one would appear from all kinds of civilized, sophisticated, educated views to be worthy of just attack, just almost mockery. But I could turn right around if I had some purpose to serve you, got to be able to do this yourself, and see that it can be supported. A real revolutionist seeing such as this wouldn't have any particular interest in it, that's not the point. But he could take something that would appear to be as wide-ranging in its potential to be a fat-ass, indefensible sitting duck on either side of the aisle. Either side, I'm not going to stop and do it for you. But I could take the pro view that this is a very serious matter and we should be doing it, and I could keep it up to the point that if you were ordinary and you listen to me, I assume you know I could. All you got to do is cooperate a little. I would have you ready to make up banners if you're ordinary and get out march in the street in favor of PC. And I could turn right around and take another view and make this sound to be such an undertaking that the word asinine you'd consider to be not even worthy to say in the same breath with political correctness. It is just begging, not just for sarcasm, it is begging for intellectual surgery of such a sort that when the patient got off the table, there'd be nothing left. You can just cut it to pieces, there's no problem. But right now, and some of you may, these tapes survive, you might see it at such a time that it may just be a vague memory, because there's no telling whether it's going to survive. I'm not going to even give you any prediction. If it's going to survive, it's going to survive in this form. Whether 10 years from now it will be forgotten, it will not, however. It'll just be in another form. But a revolutionist could have some interest in his own private interest in this way. The reason I bring it up, because this is so far removed from what other people who would be ordinarily tied up to be a pro or con, is a real revolutionist, if you paid any attention to it. That kind of radical change of thought would be simply to notice what a good sign of health the whole affair was, because what it is proof of is that life continues to try and expand itself through man, to try and expand all forms of secondary descriptions and the way in which it thinks, the way in which it describes how it thinks through man. That's what it is. And yet it comes out as always, and I could have picked out religions in the past, but I was trying to bring something in contemporaneous, that every time something that a change, if let's assume this survives, even in its name for a period of years, it starts out in the same way that religions would have, political ideas in the past, all sorts of secondary movements. And once you understand what I mean by secondary movement, it doesn't matter what we call them, religious, economic, it's all the same thing. But they all start out being themselves overweight, fairly crippled, sitting ducks. But notice, if an ordinary person, if we were trying to present this to an ordinary person right now, who had any interest, who said, yes, I've been reading about this and keeping up with it. If I said, boy, there's that thing, a sitting duck. If we were in our imaginary House of Parliament, as soon as I said it, everybody on the right side of the aisle would say, hear, hear. Everybody on the left side of the aisle would say, right-o. Because they would assume that I meant from their view. Because from their view, you're right. This is indefensible. This is intellectually so despicable, so unworthy of an intelligent person's consideration that I'm glad somebody finally spoke up and attacked it. It's not that. It's sitting ducks from either side of the aisle, which everything is a sitting duck from every side of the aisle. You can laugh forever at Christianity, Judaism, Islam, any religion, by the same token. You can come right along if you know how to see it. It's not the point, but if you know how to see it and realize that we would not be where we are. You would not be sitting there were it not for religion. Anyone you will name, or if you just want to say religion with a small r. All religions, any religions. You would not be here. You would not be here now. I don't mean some theoretical, historical way, but right this second. We could not be having civilization. We know it, were it not for the great blank, the great theories of Buddhism, of Marxism, of watch-outism. Anyway, the example, I'm not going to stick with it, but it is just so beautiful and is right today, right this second. And what it is life. One last time, this is not the only reason I use it as an example, but it is life, regardless of the fact that from one view, at least from a city view, from any description I wanted to use, or you could do it yourself, you could laugh it off the neural face of the earth. You could just ridicule it. You could just make so much fun of it. Not just crudely. You could do it intellectually, philosophically, historically. You could just go like, and yet, in spite of all that, it is a sign of health. It is life continually trying through man, and what we've been calling the secondary world, it is proof of life trying to expand the scope of its own secondary thought and description. All right, one final hint before I go into another example. That which from a good, solid, city, intellectual view, that could be of something new that happens in life that is just prima facie somewhere between silly and almost obscenely improper. If it strikes you that way, there's several things you can learn from it. One thing is life is still going on in a healthy way, and another one is you're a dumbass. You're probably not feeling well. Because and from one view, from at least in a mathematical, figurative sense, every time a change starts to happen, at least half the people see it as being what I just described, as being somewhere between ridiculous, which most people in life do not see things as being ridiculous, especially things they do not like. But I'm just saying that because some of you now understand that there's a certain amount of, shall we say, humor in all of this. Not me talking, but in all of this. But it strikes at least half of those who are wired up to be interested in whatever the change starts out to be. At least half of them find it to be range somewhere between being ridiculous and being so intellectually bankrupt as to be perverse that perhaps, I hate to say it, but perhaps we should bring back some form of censorship, because this is insane. At least half the people. And you understand, half the people are not a fixed number that I can pick out, or that you can. Because any half you think would think that, all you got to do is blink a second if you know how to do it, and it's the other half are thinking it. In other words, if you're in Parliament, it doesn't matter. You're not a revolutionist. When the right side of the House hollers rubbish, and you think, yeah, I'm with you, you're right. You are with them. The revolutionist is a kind of intellectual visitor. How about that? There was another example that continues in our lifetime, but with a slightly different spin, is how common it is for ordinary minds, intellectual people, social critics, but ordinary minds, to pick out that which now is, in this part of the world, the greatest hobby of everyone, if we're going to judge the use of time by all the figures I read, and that's television. But how quite ordinary minds, all the way from that to, as I said, respected critics, condemn the excessive commercialism of commercial TV. That they state, they write papers, they can prove, and I could join in with them. I mean, if they're free drinks and something to eat, I'll join. But how they can point out and how they can say that there are far too many advertisements, just the continual effort, the way things chopping up for our own intellectual good. And they can prove it. I can prove it. Hell, I agree, don't you? Except for this. The real revolutionist knows that that is not actually valid. Now, out there it is. You know, well, now we're not saying that we're right or that I'm right and they're wrong. And a real revolutionist wouldn't go up to the man who just proved that ordinary television is bad enough. Forget all sex and violence. Where? Forget all the sex. Forget all that. Forget all that rotting the teeth and the brains of our children. It's the commercialism. It's almost as bad. No. The real revolutionist is not saying to them, or would not say, you're wrong, because he's not wrong. But the real revolutionist, see, that's life looking after its own interest in a certain way. Life continues to turn out commercial TV, and life continues to turn out people going, whoa. The real revolutionist knows the attack about being too commercial, too many advertisements, too much appeal to greed, the commercial instincts, the consumerism, at the expense of our minds. And specifically what I was trying to point you at is the one where it sounds like it's more than just a cheap shot at television, is those men who say, well, it's enough that we portray the American family or human values in a questionable light and all this, and showing too much sex and violence. But it's also this continual bombardment of buy. This commercialism, it is not good for a man's, an intellectual nowadays wouldn't say soul, but that's what he's still getting at. But he might say it's bad for our intellectual health. A real revolutionist understands life's looking after its own health. And he would understand the attack of saying it's too commercial is invalid. Now remember, this whole idea, we're not here attacking something. We're here talking about a man being able, a revolutionist, to look after his own interest while life's looking after its own interest, and they do not step on one another's toes. A real revolutionist understands that attack of excessive commercialism is invalid because he understands that the commercial aspects of television must be thriving for him to, let's assume that his interest would be in non-commercial television, for it to survive and serve his interest. The commercial television can't be too commercial. But now understand, I'm going to put it into words. God, I hate it, but I'll do it. It may mean, I'm not saying in any way, you should know by now, you people out there, I'm doing this for you. The people here know. Where are the people here? All right, it's just us. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with commercial television, you understand. I'm not saying that, but let's assume that who I'm referring to as a revolutionist, not for better or worse, let's assume that he has no particular interest in commercial television. You know, he's tried it and he didn't particularly like it. And so if he does turn on the box, he turns on non-commercial television. So then to hear an attack on commercial television, not just for the quality, for the commercialism of it, he would understand that's not valid. Life's looking after itself, and I have no knock against commercial television because he understands I'm not going through this because you people got to be this sharp. But now you got to understand PBS would not exist if our economy were not at the level it is. The economy is slowing down now. Again, I refer you to on tape. Anybody that sees this later, we're going through what is now known as a recession, and they have cut the federal monies into PBS because of it. If the economy got worse and there were less commercials on television, and you did flip it on, or you read an article that commercial television, the networks are reaching such a point that one or two of them may have to go under, that revenues, advertising revenues are down, and you went, ha ha. You know, I got news for you. Still assuming that this guy had some interest in television, but let's assume that all he ever did, if he ever turned on, was to watch PBS. He is in favor. He understands that any attack on the commercialism of the interest of which I do not participate, not for better or worse, but his interest, what little or whatever he had in television, was not in the commercial networks. Not better, not worse, none of that. It's just not. But as far as others attacking, and you understand he would be what I've described thus far. If we were talking about an ordinary person, it would be not just a predictable, it'd be an almost anti-predictable. Okay. It's beyond predictable to assume then that the guy would, if his interests were in non-commercial TV, every time you heard commercial TV attack, I don't even have to say it. Your nervous system was already responding to the energy of like, yeah. He may not be in a position to get his opinions published. He may not be an expert. But somebody who really did not watch commercial TV, when they heard it knocked, when they heard the attack, they would be the ones saying, yeah, no. Don't you see? In other words, let's say there's two interests. Now, life right now in certain parts of the world has an interest in commercial television. Don't ask me why. It's just there. Then let's assume that we have a revolutionist, where we started tonight and the last time, that has his own interest in life. And he's trying to pursue his own. And let's assume that sometimes his interest is shown on television. But every time he does, he turns on non-commercial television. If he's going to watch anything, it'd be something on there. And then he hears commercial television knocked. And he never watches it. He knows what's on there, and he doesn't care for it. It's not his interest. We're speaking, trust me, if you can do it, as objectively, as clinically, as impersonally as possible. And then he hears this area in which he has no interest attacked. That is, somebody attacks commercial television. Not only for the poor quality, but for the excessive commercialism of it. Now, one more time, if we were talking about ordinary people, you would assume that then this guy that only watches non-commercial television would at least internally go, yeah, tut. You can't do that. You stop being a revolutionist. Not in some theoretical way, and not in some way that you go, oh, shame on me. You have fallen back into life's interest. Because, again, half the people who hear commercial television attacked, half the people, just using our crude numbers, the way forces line up in life, half the people go, here. Half the people who are interested, not half the people in the world, half the people in the world that watch commercial television, they heard the attack, they wouldn't even hear the attack. You know, many people just turn it on, it's just noise. It's a night light or a daylight. But at least those who might take it, who are wired up to be interested in critiques, debates regarding television, at least half of those who might hear that, half of them would think, here, that's true. And half of them would think, well, no, there are things wrong with television. You understand? But a real revolutionist has no opinion. I always try not to say that because it describes nothing, and it's awfully tempting for an ordinary person's mind to go, well, ooh, wait a minute. The Beatles said that. Or, anyway, don't get distracted. Because opinion, you see, I'm sort of, after the fact, biting my tongue. It's that the interest, whatever they are, in commercial television would not be my fictitious guy, my real revolutionist, my subversive thinker, would not be his or her interest. Contraire. See, it's not just the opposite, it's why contraire. I shouldn't have said that. Jesus. Write down opinion and contraire. You understand? Because it's not the opposite from this. The real revolutionist understands that the attack on commercial television is invalid to me personally. Now, I'm playing for the real revolutionist. That's invalid to me personally because of this. If commercial television does fail, then the interest I have at times in non-commercial television is also going to fail. Because the continuation of my interest being served, in this case non-commercial television, is only served if this continues over here. That which I'm not against and I'm not for it, it's not my interest. But he understands my interest is tied to it, which it always is. All right, it could be such a motto as this: sans any criticism, no sarcasm, but it'd be like, in this regard, it'd be like a revolutionist having his own private slogan that was actually expressing the health of his support of the health of the secondary world. So remember, it'd have to be, the words have a hard time with it if you're listening with ordinary ears, but it would be with no cynicism, no sarcasm, no hostility. It's actually an expression, my support, if using me as the real revolutionist, be his support for the health of everyone. In this regard, his private slogan I was going to get to could be this. Don't tell anybody, it would be, how about this? PBS for me, commercials for everyone else. That covered it, whether you believe it or not. But you remember, no hostility, no sarcasm. It's no that I'm right and they're wrong. It's none of, well, yes, I have better taste. It's none of that. It's that a real revolutionist, somebody that can think in a different place, can pursue interest, and they're never completely separate from life because there are no interests separate from life. So to say, well, PBS television is completely separate from commercial television. Now, what are you using for a brain? It's television. Yes, but my interest is in exotic, intellectual, academic television. Okay, fine. But you do understand it's still coming through that box. It's still television. Yes, but it's not the same thing. Now we're getting somewhere. We're not getting anywhere? You can have an interest, and you can pursue it when it does not conflict with life, and you can pursue it in such a way that although it can never be completely separate, we're still talking about television in this case. But you can pursue it in such a way that you're pursuing your interest. You're not supporting the struggle of the two forces out of three, but the two forces, the pros and cons of everything that makes life's interest viable at this level. It's only the revolutionists that can have an interest and you got no opinion about it. I did it on purpose that time. Do you hear me? In other words, again, I'll use this example and then we're going on. Assuming, and it's no statement regarding the quality of television, the writing, none of it. And it's no pseudo proffering that someone who watches, or suggesting that someone who watches PBS has better taste and more. It's none of that. PBS has got its own share of schlock, I'll bet. But it's, in this case, if the revolutionist watches television, he watches whatever he watches for his interest, and whatever the debate is about television, which is always a debate, not just television, religion, the existence of God, the existence of Edward R. Murrow, the existence of, whether Baskin and Robbins at any particular time actually has 32 flavors there on the front. There's a debate about every damn thing. And so the revolutionist may have an interest in ice cream. But when he finds out that there is a debate, that now somebody has undertaken a lawsuit, which, God, I shouldn't make this up because it probably happened, that somebody decides that somebody has got their own interest in life, somebody else, and got nothing else to do, they keep going up to Bastard and Robbins up the street, and have been for years, and they have never been there. And they begin asking, just sort of, they say they stumbled into it and began to ask, but they have never been there, and they began counting the times over the last 3 years. They have never been in that place where they at one particular time had 32 flavors there available. And they're sick of seeing that sign. They're sick of going in and say, well, name me the flavors. So they name the flavors, they point to the sign, and the guy counts them, and he says, there are only 20. They say, well, we're out of some. So he keeps track. So now he's suing them. Do you understand? Worse has happened, sillier has happened, better has happened, more fun's happened. But a guy who is interested, a real revolutionist who's interested in ice cream, he might not, when he goes in, if he's got one particular flavor he likes for the time being, that's his interest, and he goes in, they don't have it. Now you can say in some way his particular interest is being hurt, because he thinks, I wish they had my flavor. But when he hears that there is a raging controversy, they got people out there picketing the place about Bastard and Robbins lies. They never have 32 flavors. Or here's about the lawsuit. In some way, you got to see, as always, his interest has some relationship to them. But his interest is not in that. His interest was his own. His interest is not in any debate about what's going on in life, which is inescapable when you're talking about life's interest. Because the debate, the pros and the cons, the arguments, the pushing and pulling of the two main forces, the two visible forces, are always there. That could be described as life's interest. Everything else is costuming. That is the energy of life's interest. That there be a pushing and a pulling, that the dance is going on. Somebody is always leading, somebody is always dancing backwards. That is life's interest. It could be known as debates over food, over religion, economics, watch control. It doesn't matter. A real revolution could have his own interest, and it could be similar. They could both apparently be about ice cream, the personal ownership of watches. Except the revolutionist's interest is somewhere beyond the debate that is at the bottom of life's interest in whatever the field appears to be. Remember, the secret, non-hostile slogan could be, PBS for me, commercials for everyone else. Did I put the right dramatics? It's like, set them up. It's a wishing of goodwill. It's not like, make them suffer with commercials. It's like he understands I can't have PBS unless they have the commercials. And obviously those who watch them must want it. So it's PBS for me, commercials for everyone else. What could be fairer than that? Unless you listen with an ordinary mind, you go, fair? That's not even logical. We hadn't got around to the question of fairness. Well, what could be fairer than insanity then? Well, I was going to take us into, or try to turn your attention to more personal affairs. What might seem to be more specifically human, the more human interest of an individual. Wherein, such as in human relationships, wherein the individual, or me talking about a real revolution, wherein the individual's interests seem inseparable from others. Where I plus not I seems absolutely inseparable. That we can't say we got a real revolution is going into an ice cream store and all he wants is ice cream, and he got no interest in some debate going on about the way the business is run, about the lack of them living up to their advertising. If we get into personal relationships, family, sexual relationships, either one, then we've apparently got situations that we cannot that easily make such a division. That the dance, it will get hard to separate it even verbally, right? Don't you wish? So let's consider. If we're talking about, and you can fly it with family or sexual, and I wouldn't be surprised if we talk about it for a little bit, that I'll split it up example-wise somewhere, but anyway, it both applies, even though I know that family-wise, it would appear to be those of you that really have good memories and can remember back even 2 or 3 days, there might appear to be more of a primary connection, and so that your connection with your family is not the same as it is sexually. That's true, and it's not true. And the right side of the aisle hollered, "Here, here," and the left side hollered, "Rubbish." Or maybe it's the other way around. Right? I just started this paragraph, and you're gone already? All right. Relationships. Apparently you and somebody else that we're talking about. It would almost be as though, remember what we're talking about, by the way. We're still talking about the possibility of a real revolutionist, whoever that is, whatever that is, being able in the midst of life to look after some private interest he or she might have while not interfering, which covers a multitude of hand gestures, sins, figuratively speaking, does not interfere in any way with life looking after its interest. That it's like a person here and there can slip out and look after their own interest in some way, a little private interest, and it seems to have no effect on life, and vice versa. There seems to be nothing going on untoward, which is not enough to excite a real revolutionist. The real part is it even possible? You know, screw whether it interferes with life. Well, that's technical terminology. So we have a relationship, and it would seem as though we cannot now as easily separate it as saying, well, a guy could say, well, I'll get myself a watch, but I don't care whether they pass legislation, especially once I got a watch. You know, pull the ladder up behind you. Who cares? You know, once I get a watch, if they pass legislation and outlaw the ownership of a watch, you know, what the hell do I care? I'll go hide mine. They're not going to get mine. I don't care after that. Pass it, forget it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I don't have to keep track about how did my congressman vote. I got a watch. The hell with it, right? But now wait a minute. We can't take that into personal relationships. It would appear to be so. But it would be almost as though a real revolutionist, when we got into personal relationship, had now some sort of private operational use almost of this equation, at least parts of it. Follow me. That here it is, I plus not I plus my mother, I plus my sweetheart, I plus my husband, I plus my wife, whatever, I plus my sister, I plus my children, equals everything. Our relationship. You know, it's us. There are two, I suggest, most efficient, potentially useful ways to look at it. It's good I came up with 2 looking at the clock and we got 6 minutes. All right, 37. Okay, 2. One is this kind of almost private personal operational use of an equation such as this was, may I suggest, the real revolutionists might look upon the equation in the sense that his part, the I, in the relationship would be, of course, what he's or she's contributing, but he would consider, he would act as though, he would operationally act as though, he would operationally assume, and none of those words count, but we got to press on, would operationally assume and act as though the other person, the not I, is going to contribute less to the equation, cares less about the equation than he does, or of course she does. If you were ordinary people, God forbid, oh, you'd be ready to stroke your chin, scratch your head, take a serious note, take a serious position like, wait a minute, I don't like the sound of that. Well, as that great philosopher Percy Mayfield said, hit the road, Jack. See, a lot of people probably thought that Ray Charles wrote that. But that's why I'm the head philosopher and you're simply a disc jockey. No hostility, no pro and con. It would be a kind of impersonal, which is the only thing you can do with mathematics if you know how. How can you be personal about a damn equation? The real revolution I'm suggesting in the equation operates as though, not talks, assumes, and it's not really think. That's why I didn't want to say assume, but I had to. But it's a kind of operational assumption. It is a kind of operational acting as though the other person, no knock on the other person, not a pejorative, not an iota of a pejorative thought, feeling toward this other fictitious person. The revolutionist looking after his own interest. And in this case, life's interest in this relationship is reflected by the not I factor. The other person. That's life's interest. In the same way that the revolutionist would in the question of watch control. The revolutionist would operationally act as though, would operationally assume, with no feeling whatsoever, no personal animosity, no fear, no nothing. I'm sorry, technical again, but no nothing. But would simply operationally act, would operationally assume that the other person had less interest, was going to contribute less to the equation than you are. That's it. Case closed. If you can hear me, I'm sorry. Don't reach for your gun. It's too late. You've been outdrawed. That's it. Don't anybody tell any psychiatrists or Joyce Brothers or marriage counselors, but that's it. And you know, in the privacy or the publicity of the ordinary world, this would not run up the flagpole and it would not wave and no one would salute it. Because people could hear what I'm saying, they'd go, well, wait a minute. And ordinary intelligence would have to take some position. Like, well, wait a minute, you're just saying to try and in some way become insensitive, or you're trying to in some way, you're trying to reflect some kind of probably subconscious fear of being hurt. I hate to keep getting technical, but it's, you missed it. It's simply the same way that if you look out and it's dark, you might take an umbrella. Who but an idiot's going to be mad at an umbrella? Who but an idiot's going to be mad because it may rain? You've got to be suicidal to be mad that it rains. From this kind of secondary view, we're talking about the intellectual world. We're talking about what seems to be relationships, love. We're not talking about sex now. We're talking about the blooming of the primary world of sex into the secondary world of human relationships. Love, commonly. If we're talking about sex, or if not, we're talking about family. What I'm describing, you would be just as insane, but the ordinary mind would do it anyway, to assume that, well, wait a minute, if you're saying to look upon the relationship, to look upon your lover, to look upon your mother, and to assume that you're going to always be putting in more in the relationship, of course, I like it the way I put it first. It's why I put it first that way, and of course that's why let me go back and put it the other way, the original way. Is the revolutionist would assume that the other person would operate as though, operationally assume that the other person is going to contribute less. In the same way, you look up and it's dark, you assume it's going to rain. Who but an idiot's going to get mad? One more time, you know this, it's suicidal. It's got to rain, which is not even the point, but it's just a great example. Of course, if you're really good, everything's got to rain. Not just rain's got to rain. You look around, you see somebody, boy, the world could do without him. Whoever it is one little drop of rain. It could have been that one drop of rain that put the finishing touch on that one sunflower growing, that fed the one cow, that gave the one drop of milk that saved your life. And that kind of story. The real revolutionist attitude would be impersonally, truly impersonally, which of course you can't do except in some new place in the nervous system, but would be that the other person you operationally assume, you operationally act as though, you operationally live as though, the other person, even if it's your mother, that the other person is going to contribute less to the equation. Because it's not the other person, it's life. But you assume the other person is going to contribute less, you assume that they care less about it. Thus, the real revolutionist is always tending to his side of the equation. That is, looking after his own interest. If he sees having an interest in it, he got no more interest in the equation. Doesn't matter whether the other person is contributing much or not. But as long as he's in the dance, to think, well, the other person's not carrying their load. The more we dance with this, more I dance with this girl, or if you're, do your own sexual version. The more I dance with her, it seems like the heavier she gets. Sometimes it's like she's staying on my feet. Dark clouds, it may rain. What do you want? You assume it. Operationally, not theoretically, and not in some form of resignation. You must assume that's the only way to look after your interests, whether it be watch control or a human relationship. Next time. That means next time. That means next time on the